So you've got a slider, but you've got no motor, and you don't want to spend $300, $500, $600, $700 on a proprietary motor to make your slider shot smoother. Guess what? I think I found a solution, and you can do it for about $100 US. So let's take a look. So my goals were I wanted to avoid buying a GH5 for $2,000 just to get 60 frames a second so that I could make a quick movement on my slider and then slow it down in post to have a nice, slow, steady slider movement. So rather than spend $2,000, I figured maybe I can just motorize my current slider that I already have, but I didn't want to spend $300 on up, which is, I have a Konova, and the proprietary sliders for those are about $300 on up, depending on what features you want. So I decided maybe I can just get a motor, get a pulley system, and make that work. And it turns out works pretty darn good. Now, this is not for people who want to do time lapse. This is not for people who want to film a slider near where they're recording audio, because the motor that I'm using is pretty noisy. And this is not for people who want to also do panning, although you could probably figure something out. This just talks about the movement from left to right or right to left. So the basic principles are you already have a slider that has a slider plate. Well, how do you get that from one side to the other in a smooth, controlled way and have the ability to adjust the speed to just the slowness that you need in real time? Now remember, you can shoot something very slow, use it as is, and it's great. But if you want to speed it up, you can do that too. You have extra frames, you have more information because you've gone slower. You can't really do the reverse. Therefore, a lot of people buy a camera that can shoot, let's say 60 or 120 frames. They make the movement very quick, which they can make it steady and smooth, and then they slow it down. But I didn't want to do that. Okay, so here are the principles. You have a motor on one end with a pulley that's attached tightly. You have another free spinning pulley on the other end, and you have basically a string in between them, and the two ends of the string attached to the plate that moves back and forth on your slider. Once you spin that motor, it'll pull the camera in one direction or back in the other direction when you reverse it. That's the basic principles. Now, I ran into some challenges, and I think that I've been able to get a lot of these kinks worked out, and the solution that I'm going to present to you is pretty elegant, and it definitely could use some modifications. But I saw a couple of videos that inspired me, and they really weren't fitting what I wanted to do exactly. Like, one had a time-lapse motor that was like $100, but its top speed was just way too slow for what I wanted. Didn't work. Another guy used a servo motor. Well, I couldn't control the speed of the servo motor, so it was a single speed. I didn't want that either. Now, keep in mind, I say it's $100. Now, it actually, you could maybe even do it for less, but the truth is, all the stuff that I put on Amazon, some of them are like kits. Like, for instance, I recommend you use a couple of O-rings to give your pulley wheel some more grab. Well, yeah, you could go buy a couple of O-rings at wherever, and it's probably pretty cheap. I'm going to recommend you get a little box that has a bunch of O-rings on Amazon, and let's say those are like $10. So if you buy everything on my Amazon list, it might be more than $100. In fact, I know it's going to be. But the truth is, I like buying stuff on Amazon, and it gives me parts to use on other things, and it's usually a lot cheaper. So just wanted to get that out of the way. But I did this in the end for, realistically, about $150. And I have a lot of extra stuff. Now, there are some tools that you're going to need. Most of them you probably have, like a pair of scissors, a screwdriver, that kind of thing. It will be kind of important to have a drill of some kind. A handheld drill is fine. And I recommend like a stepped, what they call a unibit, or a stepped drill bit. I'm going to link that. I'll link everything below. That allows you to drill a few holes where needed to kind of get your stuff to mount up. Now, my slider didn't have a lot of places to mount the motor and the pulley, so I had to get kind of creative. Keep in mind, most sliders will have threads for 1/4 inch 20, which is the standard for tripod stuff, so that you can mount the slider on a tripod either this way or on its end. So that's the good news. So all of the hardware you're gonna see, I just scrounged together, and it's all 1/4 inch 20 stuff, and that really allowed me just to have one set of nuts and bolts. Now you can go smaller if you need to use little holes to kind of mount the brackets. I'll show you all that in a second. Let's take a look at the various pieces of what I've built. The motor mounting plate is available on Amazon, but the holes were not big enough for my 1/4-inch bolts that I wanted to use. So I went ahead and drilled them out bigger. I think I used a 3/8-inch bit. And then I used a pair of side cutters, diagonal cutters or dikes, to cut them out even further. So I kind of had some play, because where I needed to mount it, I didn't have a lot of options. So I was able to make that work, and it works actually awesome. It's tight, it's level, and keep in mind the pulleys do not need to be exactly in the middle of your track. So if they're off a little bit, don't worry about that. Now, the pulley itself on the motor side, I have to say, it was super challenging finding one. I actually went local because I had to get this done for this video. And I ended up at like a specialty hardware place, which was kind of like a Granger's. It's called Marshall Specialty Hardware. However, what I have done is I have linked what's kind of like a geared pulley on Amazon, which I think should work really well, especially if you use the O-rings. I'm going to link it, and I think that should just work fine based on what I can tell in the description. Most of these motors are 6mm shafts, and 1/4-inch is 6.3mm, but finding a pulley that will match either of those can be a little challenging with a nice tight set screw. That's what you really need. And I did go ahead and I took 2 O-rings that were very small, and I stretched them big time using a screwdriver over the outside part, and they kind of stuck into the middle really nice and tight, and I had 2 of them. You might need to use more depending on the height of your pulley, and those provide a really nice grip for the paracord, which is kind of like shoelace, almost like stretchable shoelace material. That's what we're using for our belt, essentially. I would not recommend using rubber bands. I went down that road. They're terrible. Use O-rings, trust me on this one. On the other end, I actually used another pulley, and this pulley can spin freely, no problem. It's got a little bearing, and I used one that comes out of a sliding door track. It's made for sliding doors. It's the bearings aren't the best, but it's like a 2-pack for $7, and it works great. Mounted that on a 1/4-inch bolt, which was way longer than it needed to be. Put a couple of nuts on either side to get the height just right, and put that string around, attach them to the plate, which is just a piece of metal with some holes in it, with paracord or cord locks, and that allows me to kind of get the tension just right, or if I wanted to loosen it or tighten it, and it's just a perfect, easy adjustment, and you're good to go. And then finally, you have to power the motor with something. Now, you could just hook up a 12-volt motor, and then you'd be at the liberty of whatever the motor's RPM is. Now, the lower the RPMs, typically the more torque you have. And so I kind of experimented with different motors, found what I think might be the perfect RPM. Actually, I think there's a range. So I ended up starting with 120 RPM. It didn't really have enough torque, especially at the lower speeds, and that's the problem, is that the 120 was too fast on the top end, and on the bottom end it just wouldn't. It would chug a little bit. So I tried a 30 RPM. That's pretty good. The problem is that when you want to go back to the beginning or move the camera from one side to the other, it's a little slow, even all the way cranked up. And I'll get to how you adjust it in a second. So I think something between a 30 to a 60 RPM motor would be perfect, but you need a speed control. So you have a 12-volt power supply, you feed that into this little PWM, pulse width modulation speed controller, and then that goes out to the motor, and it's got a little reversible switch, so you can have off, forward, or reverse, and it's got a little pot or potentiometer. You can adjust the speed of the motor from very slow to its top end speed. I think 30 is pretty good. Maybe I'll order a 50 RPM in the future and try it and kind of see what I get, but the one that you're seeing is all 30 RPM. And I've connected all of the DC connections with little pieces of wire and these little quick connect DC power jacks and plugs, which I think are awesome. They don't require much soldering. There's a little soldering that needs to be done on the motor, although you could possibly find some little crimp-on connectors to do that, but I did solder it. So, some of the things in here are optional. Those connectors, you can totally bypass those. You can buy a lot of the parts in little onesie twosies if you want, but I just recommend just get a kit. When you're gonna buy screws, just get a kit. If you're gonna buy O-rings, get a kit. It's like 10 bucks. You'll have them for a long time, and you'll be able to go to that and use them for other projects. So you may have guessed already, but a lot of the footage that you're seeing is the exact slider I built shooting some of this B-roll. So you've already seen it in action. And I think for, you know, $100 to $150, this is a great way to have smooth, speed controllable slider shots. So I hope this helps you. Hope it gives you some ideas on how maybe you can save some money and get some better, more professional looking video shots and allow you to really have options when you go into post. So I'm Chris with 2-Bit DaVinci. If you click those Amazon links, it does really help us. That's probably the best thing you can do for us so that we make a little bit of money and we can kind of keep dedicating our personal time to do more and more videos like this. If you have comments or questions, please put them down below. You know, subscribing is awesome. If that's your thing, we would love it. We would love to have you as a subscriber and hope we can keep you subscribed. And remember, they're only photons. Have a good one.